Politics, commentary, entertainment, sports, news, and opinion. Now, here is Steve Malzberg.
All right, folks, it's time for the Malzberg panel. And joining us on the Malzberg panel is Seton Motley, founder of Less Government, and John Gizzi, Newsmax, Washington, D.C. bureau chief. And before we start, folks, we're going to maybe gravitate to Iraq afterward, but I want to start with some domestic politics. Let's watch this.
So much of it reminds me of 1964. Maybe I'm the oldest person around, and I probably am, and maybe the only one old enough to remember that. But I remember a Republican Party where you had Republican moderates, mostly in the East, headed by Nelson Rockefeller, and then you had Western conservatives headed by Barry Goldwater. Those two factions never came together, and Goldwater lost the election in a historic landslide. And how do you prevent that from happening?
All right, that's his question, and the chairman of the RNC very aptly responded that, hey, you know, we're winning everything. We lost the presidency, and then an incumbent president won, but we're winning governorships, we're winning state legislatures, we're winning all over the country. Let me start with you, Seton. This notion, and this was all, the premise of this whole thing you have to understand on Face the Nation, and the line of questioning was, Cantor, defeat for Cantor means immigration reform he believes is dead, and this is going to be a disaster for Republicans. David Brooks expressed the same sentiment. I just don't get it anymore. Why would this be a disaster for Republicans?
Well, if I may briefly point out, his 64 analogy is flawed. Goldwater himself said the American people were not going to validate a presidential assassination by electing someone from the opposite party. And I do think that was a factor in what happened in '64. I'm not saying he would have won, but I think that was a huge motivating factor for the American people in that election. Second of all, the Goldwater analogy isn't as good as the Reagan analogy, because the Goldwater loss led to the Reagan landslide victories, because they resolved that, and they got behind Ronald Reagan after fighting him. Of course, the establishment fought him tooth and nail at the time, and then retroactively love him. But I just don't see his perspective, his 1964 template properly overlaying over 2014, 2016.
And John, perfectly done in tearing apart what turns out to be an inaccurate analogy for the reasons you stated. But John, what about this immigration reform that's hanging over Washington and is there for the constant grabbing, it seems, of the left-wing media to constantly say, and elected officials, to constantly take up the cause of Republicans and give them free advice and say, gee, if you guys don't do this, you're never going to win another election. What about that?
Well, with all due respect to the punditocracy and the so-called experts, Steve, Eric Cantor's defeat had nothing to do with the downfall of comprehensive immigration. The reason that that is never going to see the light of day in the House is that the House members, almost to a person, will not swallow the Senate bill. Why? Because, as one lawmaker told me, we don't do comprehensive well. Look at Obamacare. And the fact is that no member is going to deal with any of the components of immigration reform until the first among equals is dealt with, and that is border security. Bob Goodlatte, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, has made it abundantly clear. It will be incremental, and it will be predicated upon border security being enacted, tested, and proven first, and then come back to the others. Last time I checked,
right, and
Eric Cantor had nothing to do with that.
No, but I do think immigration played a large part in Eric Cantor's defeat, John. I mean, you know, saying he was out of touch with his constituency, he wasn't in the district. I mean, you know, the guy's been elected there term after term after term. Maybe this time, and you would know better than I because you're living around there. Maybe this time he just totally lost touch with the district. But this wasn't even close, and his opponent, you know, for the most part, especially in the last few days, did frame this as Eric Cantor being someone who wants amnesty. And and the results were astounding.
Well, that was a part of it, but to say it was the only part is incorrect.
No, not the only. Absolutely not. No.
And remember another thing. Eric Cantor launched an attack on this little-known opponent, calling him, quote, a liberal college professor, unquote, which was ridiculous. And that just inflamed his supporters. I was saying recently that when one spends $5.4 million and loses to someone who spent $200,000, the campaign manager should get the same punishment Donald Sterling did from the NBA, being barred from the game of political consulting.
And Seton, one more on this whole immigration thing. You know, again, and we've talked about this before, what it is that Republicans don't understand, and I believe they do. And even Boehner, who I believe would love to see comprehensive immigration reform, he understands he's working with the president who does not enforce the law that's in existence. Exactly. In many respects, especially when it comes to immigration. Look what he's doing with these kids now in these what could be described as refugee camps of sorts. So how do you go about saying, well, we'll pass more laws and give in, and then the president will enforce that? You can't count on that.
Well, you know, John laid out how they want to go step by step. You don't need any new laws to enforce the border and secure the border. That's the law now. And despite Janet Napolitano's claim when she was still around that the border's never been more secure than it is now, you know, right now, the illegal alien child invasion kind of belies that, and it was particularly bad timing for Eric Cantor's electoral efforts because he has publicly supported the DREAM Act. I want to make one additional point. Immigration was a factor in his loss. So too was his response to Bratt's charges, where he said he was against any form of amnesty, which was totally disingenuous and turned off a lot of people in his district who knew better. As far as the moving forward in immigration reform, the polls that they cite say, are you for comprehensive immigration reform? Well, that means 9 trillion different things. So when they say yes, there's a whole bunch of reasons they're saying yes. Not all of them mean amnesty for DREAM Act kids or everybody or anything like that.
Right. It could be interpreted to mean tighter border security as well. Okay, we're going to come back with John Gizzi and Seton Motley, part 2 of the panel. We'll take a look at Iraq and some of the options on the table, which apparently will be looked at later. Don't go away.